We've been privileged to have Małgosia as a faculty affiliate of the Institute of Language Information and Technology this year. Małgosia received her PhD in 2004 from the University of Potsdam. Before that, she was the scholarship holder of a fellowship from the German Research Society, working on economy and complexity in language at Humboldt University in Berlin. Her research interests are phonetics and comparative phonology and L2 phonology, and experimental and computational approaches to phonology. She has 2 books coming out, one with Damir on language technologies for linguists, and the other one, yeah, funny enough. The other one is cyclicity and opacity effects in the prosody of 2 different clitic classes.
This is an article.
Oh, it's an article. In new Stacovian variants, yes. And she's speaking us today.
I can make it a book if somebody wants to read it.
Well, all right, why not? On the influence of L1 on the L2 perception, the case of tenseness and contrast in American vowels.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy that so many people have come, because I was afraid that at this time of the year, just before the end of the semester, and on Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th, oh yes,
Małgosia
presents, yes, on Friday the 13th.
Might be fun, hopefully. Yes. So I'm going to talk about second language phonology. I will tell you what I was doing the last 2 or 3 months, you know, in this closet behind the kitchen. So probably some of you had this experience. You come into our office and then you ask some question, then I look at you, completely blank face, answer something completely unrelated and come back to work. Because I was so concentrated on what I was doing, sorry for that, now you will get the results. Okay. So, I'm going to talk about the cues in the perception of English tenseness contrast. Okay, before I even start, there are people who are more and less advanced in phonetics or phonology. We've got here an incredible span of background, so I think would be best if somebody feels that something is not clear. Please interrupt immediately, and I think everybody would, benefit from my clarification. I also didn't have much time yesterday to rehearse my talk, so it might be the case that it's not everything as clear as I think that it is. Okay, so if something is unclear, please let me know. Okay, immediately. Good. So I'm going to talk about the perception of the English tenseness contrast. And this is basically like the contrast between the vowels in the words she versus ship. Sorry for my foreign pronunciation. It's going to be about the foreign pronunciation, or really actually foreign perception. And I will tell you about the experiments that I've done about the strategies that are used in the perception of this tenseness contrast. The strategies that are used by the native speakers of American English, and the strategies that are used by English learners. So, the talk is organized as follows. Hello.
Oh, hello. Hi, Joe. Good to see you.
I'm going to tell you why I'm doing this study, or why I have been doing this study. This by means of introducing you very, narrowly to the topic of L2 phonetics phonology. Then I will tell you what I am investigating. Then I will tell you how I have been doing this. I will tell you about the design of the experimental design, how I did my stimuli, and so on and so on. If there are some specific questions about that, I will be happy to answer these questions also. Although probably I would like to move on to the results. This is the next point on the list. So what do we make of it? I will present the results of my two experiments. And if we have time, which probably we will not, I have also some the results of the experiment that I have conducted before I came to Ann Arbor, and then we'll conclude. So, why do we do L2 phonology studies? Well, we want to find out how languages are acquired, and like how it works that a foreign language is acquired, how it works that a foreign phonological and phonetic system is acquired, right? So we want to know how, but we want to also discover what are the difficult parts, depending on on the certain factors. Learners are not all the same or similar, but then we want to determine what are the areas of difficulties, and then we want to develop ultimately the teaching methods and tools that would be tailored to the learner. So this is the thing what I find so attractive in L2 phonology, because this is something that can be later applied. Well, how does L1 phonology differ from L2 phonology? Well, when the child learns phonology language as their first language, well, there is some starting point, and whatever it is, researchers might be, of different opinions. Some claim that this is something like language acquisition device. Psychologists would go into the idea of general learning strategies. But whatever is there, well, small child builds on the basis of some general strategies which are common to all humans. When you start learning a foreign language, the starting point is different, right? The starting point has to incorporate also a fully fledged phonological system of your first language, and by necessity, given different L1s, given different first languages, the process of acquisition will look a little bit different, right? So we would like to find out how, in what way, the first language influences the acquisition of the second language. Now, when talking about the acquisition of phonology, the earlier studies. Well, why don't you come over here?
No, that's fine. We'll stay in the back.
Oh, come on.
I get to be able to step out when she's. Sorry, Goja.
Is there a chair back there?
Yeah,
We should find you a chair.
There's a few chairs there.
I need to bounce.
My children are already bigger, but they were all the time, with us for all kind of conferences. So that's why I have lots of working knowledge about, like second language phonology and first language phonology acquisition whatsoever. Okay, yeah. So in the very beginning of the field, in the 60s and then maybe 70s probably, when people were talking about the second language phonology, they were talking about the acquisition of sounds, and then the studies were like that people were checking whether learners can produce certain distinctions. But then, very quickly there was an insight that in order to acquire a sound of a foreign language, you have to have this acquisition at least two levels. This is about you have to acquire the perception of the sound. That is, you learn that there are certain categories in the foreign language that are contrasting. You have to learn how many categories are there and what are their boundaries also. So this is one thing, and the other thing is to learn to actually produce these sounds. And the thing is, of course, these two levels are interdependent, probably on the moment when you learn that something is contrasting and you learn how different, how much variation you can have, okay, then you can also learn to produce it correctly. So, ouch. Okay, these the acquisition of production is probably dependent on the acquisition of perception. It doesn't have to go the other way around. That is, the acquisition of in the nowadays, people are doing both types of studies, and the study that I have done concentrate on the perception in particular, and in particular the perception of tenseness contrast in English. So I've already mentioned that she versus ship and fool versus full. Sorry for my non-native pronunciation. It's probably not as it should be. And so on and so on. When you look at the acoustics of the of pairs of vowels like that, we see that the tenseness contrast can be described in by means of length distinction. So the tense vowels are longer than the lax vowels, and longer, really much longer. We will see at the acoustic data in a moment. And the other thing is also spectral cues. So I know that we have here at least one phonetician, but otherwise I don't expect that everybody knows what formants are. Or more than one phonetician. So here we've got a spectrogram. So a spectrogram is and a wave, and here in the, I put together next to each other the lax vowel, which finishes here, and then we've got the tense vowel E, and we see that okay, this is our timeline, this is our frequency level in hertz. And then we see these darkening at certain areas, at certain frequencies. And these darkenings are formants, and given the location of formants, you can distinguish between different vowels. Okay? And well, for the listener, it's not about looking at the formants, but it's you hear the concentration of energy that is particular for certain frequencies. Okay, so what we see, okay, the formants here are traced so that we can easily follow, are traced with these red dots. And when you see, when you compare the tracings on this side and on this side, we see that the first formant here is higher than here, and the second formant is lower than here. This is the second formant, and then the third formant here is also lower than here. Okay, so by comparing, we see that these are two different vowels, right? So this is what listeners are also doing during speech processing, that is they compare the location of formants, and so the question is now here we've got the acoustic measures. In particular, we see the duration of the tense vowel is nearly twice as much as the duration of the lax vowel. So in principle, duration by itself might be a good cue for the perception of the tenseness distinction. Otherwise, we have the difference in first, second, third and fourth format, obviously, although the first three formats are important. So here we've got something like 100 hertz difference, and here nearly 400 hertz difference, so this is a huge difference, and here nearly 500 hertz or more than that. So this is how listeners in principle might cope with this contrast. Now, there have been some earlier studies on the perception of the contrast by the native speakers of English, and it has been established that basically both cues might be used. However, the majority of English dialects, including American English, is using spectral cues as the primary cue. It is more important. Now, there are some dialects that rely on spectral and durational cues to, the spectral and durational cue contribute more or less to equal level, and this is supposedly Southern British English. Okay. Now the question is, before we start asking the question, I will tell you also what has been, what were the results of the research so far with respect to foreign learners' perception of the test as contrast. So what has been discovered is that foreign learners over-rely on the durational cue. So rather attending to the spectral cues, in the studies that were done before, foreign language, second language learners of English were over-relying on the durational cues. Okay, so one would think that this makes sense if somebody comes from a language in which there is a phonemic distinction between long and short vowels, right? So if I don't know, speak Hungarian, I have long and short vowels in my native inventory, and then I start learning English and I think, oh, this is the E-I distinction. E is simply the long vowel, so I take it, and this is what I'm doing. However, it turns out that the same thing holds also for speakers whose L1 doesn't have the phonemic length distinction. And there were studies on Spanish, Catalan, Mandarin, and Russian. And many studies. Okay, and so it seems like the durational cue is something more salient than the spectral cues. And there was this so-called desensitization hypothesis, a difficult word, I can't read it. Okay, from Bonn, 1995, who was claiming that once you have learned your mother tongue, you are tuned to your mother tongue, you have learned the spectral cues that are important in your mother tongue, and then you shut off the learning mechanism for spectral cues, and that's it. You are no longer sensitive to new distinctions in the spectral differences whatsoever. But because duration is so salient, supposedly, then when you are adult, you have still access to this learning duration differences. Yeah, and I thought I would like, because there were no studies about the perception for Croatian, and just one that I'm aware of for Polish, so I thought I would like to see how it works for Polish learners, whether the hypothesis, first of all, that would it really work with Polish learners, for example, that they over-rely on duration rather than on spectral cues. So first of all, Polish and Croatian are both Slavic languages. They are pretty closely related. If they are closely related, they are also lexically and structurally similar, which makes the comparison easier than later. Interestingly, they have also similar consonantal systems, but really, so both languages have pretty complex consonantal systems with 3 places of articulation in the coronal area, for example, which is very unusual. I think this is the 2 European languages which have such systems, so they are similar. However, in the vocalic systems, they are different. And what are the differences? So here I have plotted the vowels of Croatian in red against the vowels of English. And here again, vowels of Polish in red against the English vowels. So both languages have 3 levels of height. In Croatian, you have a very regular phonemic distinction in length for vowels. So you have a short vowel and a long vowel. They are not really very much different in terms of quality. So the quality is basically the same. One is just longer than the other, that's it. It's not like in English, right? On the other hand, Polish doesn't have length distinction, but it has something else that is interesting and is really like the key point here. It has 2 front vowels, 2 high front vowels. One is very tense E, and the other is centralized. Some people, from a phonological perspective, were analyzing it as a back vowel, but if you look at the X-rays and the behavior of the vowels, you would say it's a front vowel after all. It's a little bit more centralized than the English I, so it's more to the center. On the other hand, okay, so we've got 2 high front vowels. And one could think, well, then maybe the speakers of Polish, when they hear the English distinction I, that they will interpret it as a I distinction. Okay, so the other thing is that in the back vowels we just have 1 vowel. There is no distinction here whatsoever. So I will tell you my research questions now. Well, first of all, do Polish speakers also, or subjects or listeners, over-rely on the durational cues, as it was shown in the earlier studies? Or do they rely on the spectral strategy known from the first language? That is, they will look, as they do in Polish, for the quality difference, for the differences in the location of phonics. Okay, so this is the first question. Well, this was the first question, and the second question, immediately connected, is whether the perception of Polish subjects would be the same for the front vowels and for the back vowels. Because for the front vowels, I would expect that they would rather follow the spectral cues, but for the back vowels, there is no, the strategy that we would expect from the first language. So maybe for the back vowels, Polish speakers use really the duration as a cue for perception. So this is my second question. And then for a comparison, I thought, well, I want to have a normal language that I would expect that should behave as in the studies before, and I thought Croatian would fit here perfectly. So Croatians should over-rely on length. So let's see what were the results. Before we do the results, I will tell you something about the experiment. So I conducted 2 experiments. One was forced choice identification task. I will talk a bit about it in a moment. The other AXB experiment. I will tell you also why I did the second one, although I consider the first one more important later. Okay, how was the first one done? So the story was, this was looking like that. Well, some of you participated in the study as my control American group, so you know how it looked from experience, a deadly experience, right? So it looked this way, that the subject was sitting in front of the computer screen subject would listen to a stimulus, would hear a vowel, and then the question, well, they have to just click on the picture, whether the vowel was like the vowel in sheep or the vowel that they heard was like the vowel in ship. Okay? Once they clicked on one of the pictures, this panel was activated, and they also had to say whether this was a good example of the category, either category, or was it poor. So they could judge from good to poor. I got also the measures for the response time, but I didn't evaluate that either. I also didn't evaluate this part. I was thinking that, well, I for the moment I just evaluated the results at their face value without taking the goodness of the answer, not taking the goodness of the answer and response time into account. But I was thinking that one probably can program the whole system this way, like giving less value to the answers which were like judged as poor, for example. So, but this is like, one could work on such a system later. I didn't know how to do it. So, in the experiment we had 3 groups of subjects. We had the Croatian subjects, Polish subjects, and American. And as you see, the number of subjects is pretty low, and the biggest is the American control group, because I had here control over my group. But the Croatian data and the Polish data was sent over from the colleagues from Poland and Croatia, and I couldn't really force them to do it. So this can be treated as a pilot study. There is enough of answers so that you can see the tendencies, but obviously to have really nice results without strange spikes in the graphs and so on, you would like to have more results. So I'm still collecting. When there are more, then the results will be probably more smooth, nice. But, for the moment, I had 6 Croatian subjects, 7 Polish and 7 American. Out of the Croatian group, another difficulty, 2 were advanced and 4 non-advanced. And as it turned out later, the non-advanced were so, well, they were speaking fluently, but the funny thing about it was that for the back vowels, most of them, they didn't have really 2 categories. They just thought that this is just one vowel. Wow. So the data was, I was not able to interpret the data. For this reason, also later I had to do the AXB just to see whether the results from my 2 advanced speakers have any validity, and the AXB results sort of confirmed it. Yes.
Stupid question here, Małgosia, excuse me, but were these non-advanced in learning English or non-advanced in learning Croatian?
Well, we were Croats learning English.
That's what I thought. Okay, so they're all native speakers of the
Absolutely.
L1.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes. Okay. So now about the stimuli. I had 25 stimuli for the continuum between E and A. The thing was, okay, before I move on, I wanted to the idea was to create like a matrix with different stimuli. So I here have like 25 stimuli plotted. We have 5 steps in duration and 5 steps in quality. The short lax E would be somewhere here, the short, and the long tense E would be somewhere here, okay? Then I created shorter stimuli, and then I created stimuli which were manipulated to change the format quality, so that the format qualities are somewhere in between the typical E and the typical E. So, in the end I ended up with 25 different stimuli for the continuum between E and E, and 25 stimuli for the continuum for the back vowels, and for each, yeah, this is what I've said already. And how did I do the stimuli? First I recorded a native speaker of English. This was done by a high quality recorder, digital recorder. This was not in a sound booth, but in a quiet environment, so sounded okay to me. Then I have selected the particularly nice examples of these vowels for the further manipulations. I cut them out. I measured the length and the format values, and then I converted the format values, format 1 to 4. Yes, say.
Can you tell me, were these vowels in words, or were they pure vowels?
No, these were vowels in nonce words. I asked the speaker to what was BAP, GAP, GEP, GEC. So the nonce monosyllabic words that would be, you know, like the first consonant would be voiced, the second would be voiceless, and they would be homoorganic. So I had like 3 sets, labial, the alveolar and velar, and then in the end I ended with the vowels that I cut out of the alveolar.
Okay, so the vowel onsets were after voiced stops, and the offsets were before voiceless stops,
right.
Also.
Yes.
How did you determine the offset time?
Well, I didn't. I just I looked at the because well, I was concentrating on the vowels, so I just cut out the parts which were, you know, like showing the clear vibration. That was the thing. So there was no further consideration.
Okay.
Yeah. So so I measured I looked at the steady state phase of the vowel and measured the formants in the steady state vowel phase, and these values I converted into bars because I thought that if I want to have 5 equal steps, then I want to have them perceptually, you know, validated, and so I converted them into bars and then divided the difference into 4, and so this way I have created the 3 steps in between. So this is what I did for the F2, for example, right? So I converted them into bars, divided the difference into 4, and this way I got the bar values for step 2, step 3, step 4. Then later converted them back into hertz because in Pratt I worked with hertz values. And then in Pratt there are certain functionalities that allow you to manipulate via formula the formant values. And this way I created the 3 intermediate steps for the quality. For the length, I just was cutting and pasting so to have the vowel which is approximately so approximately at 85 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, 110 milliseconds, 130 milliseconds, and 150 milliseconds. this was a slow, kind of leisure tempo of speaking, so I assumed that these are the values that I have created. So this way I have created 25 stimuli. Each of them was presented to every subject twice, so I had altogether 50 responses for each continuum for every subject. Right. And the first results. First of all, we will talk about the perception in American subjects so that we can see what we are comparing things with. This is a box plot. I plotted the responses against the duration of the stimuli that trigger the responses. And if you look at this, we see that this distribution for the category E and the category A is the same, basically. This is what it says, basically, that participants didn't use duration as a criterion to choose between one or the other category. Right? When we look at the other plot, this is the responses plotted against the quality. And here we see very clearly the split. That is one category, this is our E, is concentrated here at step 1 to 3 maximum. So I think this is 50% or 70%, I don't remember. I think 70% of the responses are in the box, and there's some outliers or less responses in beyond beyond the box. On the other hand, this is the median. And on the other hand, we have the other category concentrated between step 4 and 5, and the median rather close to the step 4, which is basically as we would expect. So what it says is that American subjects use quality, but not really duration, for the for categorization of the vowels that they have heard. Now, this was the front vowels, and these are the back vowels, and this looks very similar. That is, the distribution of the responses along the duration for both categories is nearly the same, whereas when I plotted the responses against the quality, we see that the two categories do not overlap. Here we've got scatter plot. This is not really very instructive, unfortunately. I plotted the answers against length and quality, and then the responses of with tense vowels are marked as red circles, and the responses as lax vowel are marked as a triangle. And unfortunately, because the data points, they overlap, so the answers also overlap, and we don't see them very clearly. We see that the concentration of red somewhere here and the concentration of green at the top of the plot. We see also the regression lines, which are more instructive. And the regression lines are basically horizontal, which tells us that if you change the length of the stimulus, nothing changes with respect to the number of responses in this quality. However, if you change the number of the quality of the stimulus, you will get different responses. Okay. So here we've got the regression line for the E vowel and the regression line for the E vowel. So this is the scatter plot for the front vowels, and the back vowels look very similar. So conclusion for the moment is that American data suggests that subjects rely predominantly on the spectral cues in the categorization decision. Now, how does it look for the Polish speakers? Well, this is our Polish results for front vowels again, and I've plotted again the responses against the duration, and I see again that the categories overlap as long as the as far as the duration is concerned. However, when you look at the plot of the response categories against the quality, we see that one category is concentrated at step 2 and the other at step 4. They don't. The majority of responses do not overlap. So there is like clear the decision is made on the basis of the quality rather than duration. And the same thing, yet another visualization. Here, these are histograms. I should have done it probably a little bit different, but doesn't matter. So tense vowels. When we look at the front tense vowel, we see again. If we look at the stimulus length, stimuli with different length have nearly the same number of responses, nearly the same contribution of responses for the whole sample. Whereas or when we look at the stimulus quality, changing the stimulus quality changes the contribution of the responses. So it's very clearly that the decision whether we categorize something as a member of one or the other category is based on the stimulus quality rather than stimulus length. And the same using the scatter plot, and again the regression line is nearly vertical. That is little reliance on duration. It should be surprising given the earlier research. Okay, now here we have comparison between Polish in general, Polish speakers, and this is the non-advanced, and this is still more or less the same, so there was no dramatic difference as it was for Croatian subjects. Here we go on to Croatian subjects, and what we see, it looks different than in Polish. We've got duration, and we've got responses, and we see that the two boxes are shifted away from each other. So duration does play a role in the categorization process for Croats, unlike for Poles. And but they also pay attention to quality, and it seems like, given this plot, it looks like actually they pay more attention to quality than duration still, but still it looks much more duration-based than both the Polish subjects and the American subjects. Okay? And the same in a different visualization. I mean, actually I will skip that because this is all showing the same. This is an interesting thing. So I have compared the, I have plotted the response categories against stimulus quality. And did the linear modeling, and these are the regression lines that I have received. If we have a steep slope, this means that we have, that there is a correlation between the two variables. So there is a correlation between the stimulus quality and response category if we have a line that has a slope like that. If we had something, a vertical line, there would be no correlation, right? So we see that the strength of the correlation is different for the three groups. However, this is the black regression line is for Polish data, Polish front vowels, and the red line is for Americans, and we see they are similar. This is similar slope. The and it's a little bit shifted, but still the slope is similar. Whereas the gray line, this is the Croatian, and this means that the reliance on the stimulus quality, the correlation between the stimulus quality and response category is lower for Croats than for both Polish and Americans. And this is what we expected. And this, the same thing for stimulus length, the correlation between stimulus length, the durational cue, and the response category, and this looks just great. Because Polish data, the black one, shows virtually no correlation, the same way as the English, whereas Croats, they have a negative correlation here. So, in front vowel perception, Poles, Croats and American subjects rely on quality cues, although we have seen that Croats rely on quality cues to a slightly lesser extent than the other two groups. Importantly, Poles do not rely on durational cues extensively on the, with respect at least to the perception of front vowels. On the other hand, Croats do rely on durational cue. They over-rely. So, in the light of the previous research, the claim was that foreign language learners over-rely on durational cues. We have seen it for Croats, but we haven't seen it for Polish. And we have a good reason for that, because Poles, they must use the spectral cues that they have in front vowels, because Polish has two front vowels, which are distinguished by spectral cues. So this is what we are using for also for the perception of English. Okay. By the way, I was looking whether there are differences in the strategies for advanced students and non-advanced students, and this was actually very strange, because there was virtually no difference between learners who had they speak. There is a man who speaks English to some extent, basically reads, but is not exposed to English on a daily basis. And on the other hand, speakers who are nearly bilingual and spend extensive amount of time in English-speaking countries. So this effect is so terribly strong that it's probably not easy to get rid of it. There was all advanced students, all advanced subjects behaved basically the same way as non-advanced subjects. Okay, coming back to the perception of back vowels. Just to remind you, these were the results for the American subjects, so no reliance on duration and high reliance on the quality. And again, we've got here the scatter plot. Now, what about Croats? We expect again that Croats would rely on the duration also for the back vowels, more than Americans do, and more than maybe more than Polish would do, or maybe not. Poles might adopt one of the two strategies. They would either perceive, categorize the back vowels the same as they did for front vowels, that is using spectral qualities, but this would have implications. This would mean that they can transfer their sensitivity from one area of a perceptual space to another. Or they might simply adopt the general strategy, that is, over-rely on the duration. And what do you think? Shall I take the bets?
You got 560 million to give us if we guess it.
No money, sorry. Okay. So these are the two options, and then let's see what are the results for Croats, just to raise the, here expectations. We'll see. So we start with the easy case. We see that Croats also rely on durational cue to a large extent. Yes. Okay. So we have here the plotting of the responses on the duration of the stimuli, and we see the medians are far apart, but here there is a huge area of overlapping. This shows simply how unexperienced with the two categories, how the subjects were unexperienced with the two categories. So even after years of learning the language and being able to fluently speak and converse and so on, they don't hear really the distinction between the categories, and they are completely confused in this middle area. Okay, so what about the quality? And this is surprising. So here, in this particular case, it seems that the quality was less important than the duration for the Croats. And here, this is the like a strong effect. So we see the over-reliance on the durational cue, and in the light of the American results, it's very different from the American subjects. So here we see how they didn't have two categories. The regression line for the lax, that is the green, and the regression line for the tense vowel, that is the red line, they partly overlap. This clearly shows that there was no. This was for the all subjects, so I thought I will look at the advanced subjects alone, and this was the result. Still, the regression lines show that there is some overlapping of the categories, but important for us is the slope of the regression line, and it shows here it depends very much on the length. So now Polish. We are all waiting for the results of the Polish, and what we will see that in the back vowels, the correlation between the plotting of the response category against stimulus duration. Duration plays no role, or very little role, in the categorization, whereas the decision is made based on the quality. We see still a lot of overlapping. That is, there is a lot of confusion, especially in the middle of the continuum. But still, the decision is made rather on the basis of the quality rather than on the basis of duration. And here we've got the regression lines for the Polish speakers, and we see that they are not as steep as they were in the case of Croats. And here the comparison between advanced and non-advanced, we see that there's not much of a difference. It's not the case as it used to be as it was in Croatian speakers. And here, finally, the linear modeling, the most insightful part. What we see here, Polish is black, English is red, and Croatian is gray. And this is the reliance on the quality. So Polish and English subjects rely to high extent on quality, but the Croatian, well, if you manipulate the quality, the level of responses is not changing much, which means there is low level of correlation, low level of reliance on the quality cue. And this is the length. And in length is the opposite picture. That is, if you Polish speakers and English, American speakers, they don't rely on length. Poles a little bit more, because you see that the line is slanting a little bit, but not much. And Croats, the line is much more steep. Now, we see intuitively that it's more steep or less steep. We want to validate this, and we do it with ANOVA. The statistic I calculated the statistic significance of the correlation between the cue and the response category. And in red, you have all the statistically significant values. Black are insignificant values. So let's start with those which are insignificant. No, we start with those that are significant. We see that quality is significant for everybody, but Croats in back vowels. This is what we've seen, right? Before we move on, we look at the F values. So we see that, okay, both Croatian and Polish quality, Q, for the Croatian subject and for the Polish subject were statistically relevant. However, we see that there is a huge difference between the two groups in F value. And this might give you a clue to what extent there is this correlation is there. So we see that for Polish, the correlation, the reliance of the categorization on quality is much higher than in Croatian subjects. All right. Now, for the length, we see that Poles do not over-rely on the durational cue. Croats over-rely on the durational cue. These are the results for the front vowels. For the back vowels, Croats over-rely on the durational cue, unlike Americans. However, well, the P number is on the border of significance. So normally, it is significant if P is equal to 0.05, right? And here we've got 0.09. So this is like, there is some correlation, but it's very weak. Okay. I actually wouldn't like to have it. I want to have it insignificant to show my my thesis, right? Well, you might see that here these numbers are very, very small. Right? Here, this number is comparatively much, much bigger. Right? So there is there are differences in how we might interpret the correlation between the reliance on particular cues. I also looked at the differences between the groups, and it turns out that for all cases but Polish versus English, Polish subjects and English subjects, the difference between them was insignificant. This means that they are very similar. Okay. In all the other cases, the differences were significant. All right, and the same thing for. Okay, how long am I supposed to speak actually?
According to this, you have 1 more minute.
Oh, I didn't get to my.
No, go ahead, Gosha. I think.
Okay. So, summing up so far, Polish and American subjects rely on the spectral cues in the perception of the tenseness, contrast, and back vowels. And the correlation between response category and the quality of the stimulus is for the Croatian group statistically irrelevant. And Croatian subjects, as expected, rely on the durational cue to a higher degree than both Polish and American subjects. And for Polish subjects, there is some correlation with the duration, but it is barely significant. So this is about back vowels. Back vowels seem to be perceived in a similar way as front vowels. So if I don't have time to present really the results of AXP, then I will just sum up what I was talking so far. So this is to show you the difference between, or lack of a difference between front and back vowels. That is, we see this gray is very weak, right? Do you see this gray? Not really. Oh, sorry. So what we see is, in case of the stimulus quality, okay, Q, we see a high correlation in case of English and of Polish. For the Croatian, I will draw it here with a finger. The Croatian line is less steep, but quality is important for front vowels for the three groups. Right? In back vowels, this is the English group, this is the Polish group, and then the Croatian is running here, across the screen. So this means that the reliance on quality for the back vowels is in Croatian subjects much lower than in Polish and English. And then here we've got the durational cue. And in the front vowels, Polish and Croatians, they do not rely on length. Croats rely on length. And then, okay, in the back vowels, we've got that Croats, American subject and the Polish subjects rely on stimulus length, don't rely on stimulus length either. It's similar like in the front vowels, and this is the Croatian line somewhere here. So much steeper again. So the strategies are the same for Polish and for Croatians. So Croats rely to more extent on the durational cue. They over-rely, as it was expected, and as we know from the previous studies. But Polish speakers, for some reason, not only for front vowels, but also for back vowels, rely on quality rather than on the duration. So my thesis is, well, I on the basis of this data, I have like an amendment to Bond's desensitization hypothesis. I want to claim that the sensitivity to spectral cues is not limited to the perceptual space, that it can be preserved, that the sensitivity to spectral cues can be preserved when we have in some area of the perceptual space this sensitivity for the first language, and that this sensitivity is as if not located for particular perceptual space or some corner of the perceptual space, but it can be generalized as a strategy. Okay. Now, I am aware of the problems with this experiment. First of all, I have to have more subjects, especially for the Croatian group. I was trying to amend this lack of good, reliable data by employing another experiment, a so-called AXP experiment. So I did AXP experiment also with all the subjects. The AXP experiments look this way. You hear 3 sounds in a row, and the important sound is the one in the middle. You have to answer whether this one in the middle is like the first one or like the last one. And basically the results were similar of these AXP experiments. However, there is a problem with this AXP experiment. So in the identification task, you check on the basis of which cue the categories are established. So I'm asking about the phonological categories, really, right? In the experiment like AXB, when listeners, subjects hear 3 sounds in a row, they will listen also for the fine phonetic differences. They are there in the short-term memory. So probably if you want to interpret the difference between the AXB experiment and the identification experiment, you would have to say that it turns out that well, in this AXB experiment, for all groups, I have noticed a slightly higher reliance on the durational cue. That is, in all cases, the slopes of the regression lines were a little bit steeper than in the identification tasks. So I think that all subjects, they really they hear the differences in duration, but they don't take it into account when categorizing it really for the phonological purposes. So, well, to sum up, I will skip the AXB then. Okay, so, is that something? Well, what I was happy to show is that Polish subjects do not really over-rely on durational cues, as it might have been expected given the previous studies. The experiment's results indicate that durational cues are not primary cues in L2 perception. If we have such a situation like in Polish, that you have the L1 spectral cues very salient, then speakers will rely on these spectral cues. And the important thing is that the sensitivity to the spectral cues is not bound to this particular corner of perceptual space where you have this sensitivity trained in the L1. The sensitivity is in general for the spectral cues, and then it turns out that that learners can learn the spectral differences, and they can learn to rely on spectral differences also for the areas of the perceptual space where they didn't use it in the L1. Okay. In contrast, Persian subjects rely on duration, and to the stronger extent, to the higher extent than American native speakers. So the hypothesis that foreign language learners over-rely on duration would be confirmed here by the Croatian data. Okay, I think this is what I've said. So I just want to thank everybody here. I want to thank my participants. I want to thank Helen and Tony for creating this nice environment that I could actually sit down and work finally. And importantly, I have to thank people who actually collected data in Croatia and Zadar, Antonio Oštarić, and in Warsaw, Olga Bronisz and Paweł Rydzewski. And I would like to thank Damir for teaching me some statistics. So thank you.
Questions for Gosia?
Yes.
I mean, I never heard this before, so.
Okay.
he didn't do the statistics, so the mistakes are mine. So
but the interesting thing, I'm a bilingual who has 2 languages that are both length sensitive or have a phonemic distinction in length, German and Croatian. And the interesting thing is that I hear your length in your vowels when you speak Polish, and I know that the Poles have this. It's not a phonemic distinction, but it's a phonetic one. It exists.
Yeah, but this is not
correlated. And they don't use it as a cue, so this is the interesting thing. So what I wanted to ask is, you don't use it as a cue as if it's purely phonetic, but you use it as a cue if it's phonemic or something like that, and to sort of a higher level of grammar, right? Something like
I will
that.
tell you how I see it. So Definitely, there is a difference in the length depending on stress. So stressed vowels in Polish are definitely longer. Then there is a difference in length. If you have a lower vowel, then you have a longer vowel. And the other experiment that I didn't show you was showing clearly that after all, people do listen to length. The experiment was consisted. This was about the perception of Okay. Sorry. I have to really concentrate. If I have to produce it in isolation, it doesn't sound nice. Okay, so this vowel. So this versus this, okay?
Let's hear you say them again.
Yeah, let's
fun.
Yeah, sure. So in Polish we have this, but we don't have this.
Okay.
And
what is that second vowel there?
Yeah, no, so hear that second vowel. Yes.
This is the vowel of this world.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so in Polish we don't have this, we have this. And interestingly, if you cut this vowel short, so there was relatively good discrimination between them. This was, for Polish speakers, this was like 90% in a noisy environment, so good, really, they were good. But when I manipulated this vowel, I cut it shorter to the length of the mid vowel. Then it turned out dramatically the discrimination dropped. So like from 90 to 70 or 70%, yeah, something like that. So it is used definitely. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with high vowels that is that they are so crowded in this area of the high vowels that probably the durational length, I don't know. I mean, you have to maybe listen more carefully. And here between these two, then maybe the duration alone can be relied on. I don't know. So instead, yeah.
So just to clarify a little bit about Polish. Polish does not, or it does have length contrast.
It does.
It doesn't. No phonemic
Does
no phonemic length contrast. Phonetically, some vowels
Sure.
might be shorter or longer depending on the environment.
Did you measure the durational difference in Polish between the E and the I?
No, I haven't.
The
There
two
shouldn't be.
that you were to see if in
No, I haven't.
Polish there is the quality. There is quality and quantity differences. in the
One might expect that the more centralized vowel will be shorter.
One might expect. I was just wondering.
No, I didn't measure it.
So, well, I mean, so, because if you do have a durational difference there, then Polish speakers for those two vowels are going on potentially both.
Yes, but they don't, exactly. So I think that even the results that I got, they might support probably there is no durational difference, because if there was durational difference, then subject would be using it, and they were so consistently turning away from the durational cue, then obviously they are not trained for that. If there would be something, then people would be listening to it, I assume. This is probably the first thing that I will do when I come back home. I will record myself, try to read some passage, and then try to measure the length of the vowels, and then I will tell you. For the next presentation of the data, I will include this definitely in there. Yes.
Could you tell me in what environments Polish vowels tend to be lengthened or shortened?
When they are stressed, they are longer.
when they're lower. She just.
And then lower vowels, that is A, and A is longer than and A is longer than E.
Huh. But you get variations between two variants of E, right? One longer and one shorter, you don't?
No. Polish doesn't have that much complication.
No, I meant phonetically, not phonemically.
Two vowels of...
Do you have a situation like, for example, in English where the voicing on the coda lengthens the vowel? For example, you know?
This might happen. I really think that there must be something of this sort in Polish, although it was not measured. Why so? Because I have no problems myself to produce it. So it must be in Polish there too. But you know, because both E and E can appear before a voiced and voiceless consonant, then I mean, like the variation would be for both E and E. So this would not the length cannot be or cannot be a you know, really. So the both categories would undergo the same kind of conditioning, right?
There are. This is an interesting topic to me, largely because I happen to speak a weird dialect of English, where some of this doesn't work and some of it does.
We can check what type of, what kind of you know, perceptual type you are.
In my original dialect, except in the environment of velas and H and zero onset, the distinction between E and is gone. Well, actually, that's not true. That was a misstatement. What I should rather say is that the old, in the environments I just mentioned, E tends to be I. Everywhere else, it becomes schwa.
Okay.
So, for example, you have clear contrast between words like sek versus sit. And so there, the quality has triumphed entirely over the length, which doesn't seem to.
So you have like a chain reaction, really, like a, you know, shift.
The thing is, though, vowel length has become much more important in my dialect, in the sense that there are clear, short, long distinctions, not just in high vowels, but even elsewhere. Like, for example, there's a classic distinction between Mary, Mary, marry in my dialect, where Mary, the name, is long, Mary, to be happy, is short. And I can't hear any difference apart from length between those two. So, now, it's true my dialect is an odd one, and is certainly not American, but it does seem to imply that issues like, for example, length and quality are intruding very heavily into this particular issue, and that there's sort of a rearrangement going on in the vowels, and I think something similar is happening in Southern English, which is why people comment about the difference of Southern English to American English. One final thing is that I notice here in America, when I teach phonetics, American students often have real difficulties making a distinction between I and I when there is a vela in the environment. So a lot of people will say that the vowel in kid is the same vowel as in keep. So even though it's clearly longer in one case. So, you know,
this is unsurprising because if you have a high vowel and then you have a vela consonant that is produced with a raising of the mass of the tongue towards the roof of the mouth, then there is, you know, like little space for, you know, like modifications of the vowels. So.
Well, I am absolutely sure when you start teaching Americans phonetics, you'll run into this because it's absolutely classic.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So it's and I don't quite know what to make of it because it looks like in that environment they just don't hear the difference unless there's length as well.
Well, for my study, I think here the perceptual strategies for Americans they were like important as a control group. So I needed something to compare with, and my results were such that in my group there was one subject that relied on durational cue more than others.
Coming from the South, Texas?
No, I will not tell you. I don't want to discriminate here, right? But this was just one person. So what it shows me that there is a dialectal the variation. There was also one speaker who had the slope of the that is relied on the quality and duration in a similar way as the other subjects, but the category borders were shifted. So it shows that there is a variation in the perception as well between dialects, or like depending on the where you come from. And I just happen to draw certain average from a small amount of data. When I wanted to study American subjects, then I would pay more attention to the original dialects. But my expectations for this experiment were really minimal with respect to the American subject.
I would throw in velars there just to see what happened, because I think you'll be surprised at what will happen when velars are around. They're just mean little things.
Well, this was the idea, to do the free. That's why I did the 3 sets of recordings originally, because I wanted to check the vowels that come from 3 different environments. So I wanted to present originally subjects with not with cut out vowels, but I wanted to present these nonce words and ask them, what kind of vowel do you hear? But this turned out too much work. Simply, I was thinking that this is not practical, especially given the fact that I'm not there. So nobody would be able to convince subjects to. Our experiment took more than 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and I have no money to pay the subjects. Actually, in Croatia, I think this is sort of illegal. So yeah.
Well,
so I couldn't get too much on the nerves of the subject. So I have to
just get hold of your friends and tell them to tell their students that if they don't take this test, they might get a bad grade.
Yeah, I might do that next time. Definitely, sorry.
I was thinking that you might want to take a look at Catherine Adams' MA thesis, where she compared self-identified speakers of African American English with both regional shifters and non-shifters, northern city shifters, not African American English. But in the African American English data, both production and production anyway, they don't make the tense length distinctions. So you'll find some lax vowels consistently longer than their tense counterparts. And she did a little perception, and I think you can almost push perception from say A to A or A to A by manipulating the length. Yeah, so that would be a different population. It's kind of hard to find, because you're looking for, you don't want to say you, and you, come and do my experiment, so you have to have a place where you're talking about language, and then they can volunteer and self-identify. But overall, the vowel system is really interesting along the tense dimension.
This is very clear to me, that the tenseness distinction is okay for front vowels. It's still better than for the back vowels. The back vowels are you know, the distinction is getting neutralized by very many speakers of English, say. And this was also showing that even here American native speakers had like completely inconsistent answers in terms of perception, which shows that there is some neutralization process going on. So, this is not surprising because like English vowel system is very, you know, rich in comparison to other languages like Polish, for example. And if there is an abundance of something, then obviously, like you know, the language, the system wants to eliminate something that is of
English has just got too many vowels, right?
No, turn into Arabic.
Well, it's true. I mean, Black English is so different in its phonological system. I mean, many people when they walk off a plane can't understand it, you know, even though they know English well. In fact, I remember when I picked up Dame, who speaks very good English, he even said to me, I couldn't understand that guy. A black guy was talking to him and he couldn't understand him.
Well, I have the same problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, same.
I just want to make really clear. So way back in the vowel inventory of the languages, you just said that Polish does have phonetic but not phonemic vowel length distinction. So is that a different situation?
This is not really distinction. So okay, you can notice variation in the length.
Yeah. So,
but I mean, you can't, you know.
yeah. But
There's no middle
so is
there.
that isn't that the same situation in Croatian though?
No.
It's not.
No,
it's
because
duga,
there
duga is
yeah.
lexical.
So in
Like,
Polish, you can allow
They
yourself.
really have to make sure that length is preserved to make your speech comprehensible.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. This is the reason.
Okay.
So you can't
And yet they
variate
don't
too
like it.
much because otherwise you would lose phonemic distinctions.
Okay, just clarify.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we will end here. Thank you very much, guys. Okay.